Only revealed in 2005, the once top-secret 7 Days to the River Rhine allegedly exposed the Warsaw Pact plan to win a nuclear World War III against the NATO powers boarding the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. In the military simulation, it was thought that NATO would actually be the first to strike, hitting Poland and Czechoslovakia with tactical nuclear weapons in an effort to cut off East Germany in advance of a NATO invasion. To counter, 7 Days to the River Rhine prescribed an aggressive response. Nearly 200 nuclear bombs, including some up to 500 kilotons, would rain down on West Germany, Austria, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Italy as the Warsaw Pact sought to push the Iron Curtain to the Rhine River. As a response to West Germany's integration into NATO, the USSR created its own military association, the Warsaw Treaty Organization, or Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance. This collective defense treaty meant as a counterweight to the global powers of the Western Alliance, was formed as an extension of the cooperative efforts by the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. It was seen in the West as a Soviet effort to exert control over the militaries of Central and Eastern socialist states. The 10 nations included in the pact were Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and the USSR. Both NATO and the Warsaw Pact spent 36 years fighting proxy wars to ensure that strategic policies were implemented by their respective members and allies. Each wanted to maintain their separate spheres of influence on the international stage without actually engaging in direct war with each other. Following the 2005 Polish election, the National Conservative Christian Democratic Party Law and Justice gained a majority of the seats and made Kazimierz Marcinkiewicz prime minister. In an attempt to increase transparency about the nation's communist past, the right-wing government revealed several documents from its military archives in a presentation by the Polish defense minister, Radoslaw Sikorski. The documents associated with the Polish People's Republic were subsequently declassified and released by the Institute of National Remembrance the following year. They included new details about Operation Danube, the Pact's invasion of Czechoslovakia, and information about the plans made to deal with the Polish protests of 1970 and the martial law era. The Czech Republic and Hungary had released similar documents in the 1990s, and Poland had followed suit, additionally declassifying some of their materials from the communist era at the time. The 2005 release, however, included brand new information from the global community. Among the documents was a 17-page plan detailing the Warsaw Pact's nuclear attack strategy. The report was first rediscovered by historian Peter Lunak from NATO's information branch in Brussels while researching declassified documents in Prague's military archives. The document, titled CSLA Plan of Action for a War Period, was written in Russian and carried Czech approval, signed by the defense minister and stamped by President Antonin Novotny. It includes a map detailing retaliatory plans against Western Europe for a nuclear strike. During the announcement, Sikorski claimed, quote, "This is crucial to educating the country on the way Poland was an unwilling ally of the USSR in the Cold War." The map shows a classic Warsaw Pact exercise. It was a counterattack to defend itself by going all the way to the Atlantic. The Polish government reasoned that the purpose of the release was to educate the public about the behavior of the communist regime and to distance contemporary Polish administrations from those of the past. It was also revealed that the plan was considered a viable option for retaliation up to 1986, when the Berlin Wall fell. Furthermore, it was not entirely eschewed until 1990, when Václav Havel was elected Czech president. The exercise, dated 1979, detailed the tactics for a war instigated by NATO. Unlike most scholars who believe that any first strike would quickly lead to total nuclear war, the Warsaw Pact optimistically assumed that a ground battle would still be fought after the atomic bombs were dropped. Against Western conventional wisdom, which feared an attack from the Soviet Union, the plan assumed NATO would launch the first strike. Poland's Central Military Academy commander Waldemar Wojcik spoke to how things were seen from the communist side, quote, "This was an exercise based on the assumption of a NATO attack. The doctrine of the day was that the Warsaw Pact countries were peace-loving. I visited the Pentagon in 2001 and was shown maps that were the mirror image of this. The Soviet Union wasn't the only one creating contingency plans in case the enemy struck with nuclear weapons. The United States worked with multiple variations of the single integrated operational plan between 1961 all the way to 2003. Unlike the Warsaw Pact scenario, this plan left a range of target options and launch procedures to the President of the United States. It allowed the consideration of strategic bombers, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and submarine ballistic missiles. Highly classified, some of the details were finally made available to the public in the early 2000s. The first version of the plan called on massive retaliation with little flexibility, as it targeted all communist nations alike, looking at them as a united front. Under President Kennedy, the plan was reformed with a flexible response in mind, relying on mutual deterrence through a combination of strategies not limited to the use of nuclear weapons, and targeting involved nations or strategic locations rather than all communist countries. This version remained in place for around 10 years. France, which was excluded from the Warsaw Pact plan of action, was settled on a policy of force de dissuasion, starting in 1961. Similar to the later American policy, it sought to deter rather than destroy. French plans called for air, sea, and land-based nuclear arms to be used in a counter-value strategy. The targeted locations of Soviet value would theoretically mirror compromised French assets, but wouldn't necessarily need to represent a military threat. Describing 7 days to the River Rhine, Radoslaw Sikorski stated, quote, "The objective of the exercise on this map is to take over most of Western Europe, all of Germany, Belgium, and Denmark." The Warsaw Pact outlined 7.5 megatons of explosive power in total, distributed among 189 nuclear weapons, 177 missiles, and 12 conventional bombs for the Northern Front. The largest of the nukes intended for the operation had massive yields of 500 kilotons, and the plan called for new central and southern fronts as well. 7 days to the River Rhine assumed the war would be started by NATO launching a first nuclear strike against Polish cities along the Vistula River, and against Czech towns to prevent the Soviets from sending troops to East Germany. Allegedly, the attack against Poland would create a radioactive wasteland separating Soviet troops from Europe. Sikorski spoke of the intended effects of the plan on Poland, saying, quote, "This map is a moving and shattering personal experience. It shows that the Polish army was being used to participate in an operation that would have resulted in a nuclear annihilation of our country. Over 2 million Poles could have been under nuclear threat in a theoretical scenario. The USSR would retaliate with strikes against West Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Italy. Vienna would be wiped out by a 500 kiloton bomb, followed by the Italian cities of Vicenza, Verona, and Padua. Austria would be taken over by Hungary. West Germany would lose Stuttgart, Munich, and Nuremberg, and then be invaded by Czechs and Hungarians. The Danish cities of Roskilde and Esbjerg would also be razed. Roskilde would be targeted for its size, proximity to Copenhagen, and cultural value. Esbjerg would be targeted to prevent the use of its harbor. In case Denmark fought back or resisted a takeover, the German cities of Hanover, Hamburg, and Wilhelmshaven would all be nuked. A reinforcement of the plan would have also called for 2 nuclear bombs to fall on Copenhagen. Additionally, the Netherlands would suffer the loss of Amsterdam, The Hague, Rotterdam, and Utrecht. Belgium would lose the strategic city of Antwerp, and the city of Brussels, where NATO's headquarters are located, would be made non-existent. Finally, the plan called for smaller tactical nukes to target command posts, army bases, airfields, ammunition storage sites, and even communication centers. Western Europe, and by extension NATO, would be devastated in a matter of days. The plan called for further conventional warfare maneuvering following the bombings. The USSR and East German forces would attack Northern Europe, with 18 combat divisions, air, and special forces in battles over the boundary between Germany and the Low Countries. An army of tanks would also be sent to the west to destroy the NATO front. Southern Germany would see invasion by 3 Soviet tank divisions and 3 motor rifle divisions. The central group of forces in Czechoslovakia would also enter the battle on the southern front. 19 divisions would march towards the Rhine River, expected to fight German and American forces who were in an advantageous position. Key bridges along the Rhine would be air-bombed, and alternative seats of government would be destroyed. American assets in Western Europe would be specifically targeted. As an essential plan of the attack, NATO's own nuclear arsenal would be neutralized by Soviet special forces, and NATO's nuclear-armed submarines would be attacked by the Soviet Navy. The Warsaw Pact expected not only to defeat NATO swiftly, but also to eliminate almost every Western leader from the targeted nations. 7 days to the River Rhine effectively called for a devastating Third World War. Sparking interest from critics, academics, and military experts, the 7 days to the River Rhine plan notably excludes France and the United Kingdom from its nuclear considerations against NATO. Several theories have been laid out as to why these nations are absent from the plan. Still, the most popular theory holds that their exclusion is meant to reduce the likelihood of retaliation from these countries, both of which had significant nuclear arsenals at the time. Furthermore, it's been considered that France's reduced involvement in NATO could have saved the country from the Warsaw Pact's military considerations. President Charles de Gaulle had withdrawn France in 1966 from the integrated military command structure. Although the country remained a full member and active participant in the organization, the move kept France out of committees such as the Nuclear Planning Group. NATO forces were temporarily removed from their territory, and France also briefly left NATO commands. Yet French forces remained in West Germany, and NATO still considered that the French would participate in a joint response in case of a Warsaw Pact attack. Perhaps the Soviets hoped that the French would be dissuaded from participating if the attack began from NATO's side, and the conflict stayed outside of their territory. It's been speculated that keeping the United Kingdom out of the action could have been meant to motivate the British into acquiescing to some sort of peace treaty before the conflict escalated any further, and as a way of concentrating efforts on closer targets, thereby limiting how much the Soviets stretched their forces and made themselves vulnerable. This theory has been criticized for relying on a scenario of naivete by the Soviets. While Polish leadership was aware that revealing these military plans could anger Russia, as the former ally was not consulted about the release, Polish Prime Minister Kazimierz Marcinkiewicz expressed hope that it would not have such an effect, saying, quote, "The future should be built on the truth about the past. If the truth is damaging to international relations, that's a bad thing. I'm sure this will not spoil our relations with Russia."